I am obviously beyond excited. And Bill, I wanted to start by just thanking you for making the time. I think pretty much everybody on the call was already familiar with your background, but Bill has had what I could only describe as a very enviable career in Hollywood. He has literally won a Golden Globe, been nominated 3 times for an Emmy, wrote Mad About You, and a whole bunch of other stuff. We're probably not even going to touch on Bill's experience doing screenwriting and producing in Hollywood, because I actually think his second career, or I'm sure they're more tightly related than this, co-founding the Comedy Cellar, is beyond exciting for the folks on this call. And if you're not familiar with the Comedy Cellar, which I think just about anyone who lives in the United States has seen some of the iconic sets that happen there. The Comedy Cellar is the iconic New York City comedy club where most of the famous comedians, or many of them, got their start and did their early sets. And behind the scenes, and sometimes in the scenes, was of course Bill, who has seen folks like Jon Stewart, Bill Maher, Ray Romano figure out kind of their voice as a comedian, figure out their strengths and signature move. And in the case of Jon Stewart, for example, Bill actually really spotted him early and helped coach and guide him in the early parts of his career. So we're going to be talking about just that, because I think the analogy of comedians finding their voice and writers doing the same is too rich to waste. So we have to jump on that theme. So Bill, thanks again for joining us.
It is my pleasure, Stu. And I love how you incorporated what seems like an unrelated topic of the Comedy Cellar back to the signature move so as to make it relevant for your audience. That was very nicely done.
Well, coming from you, that means a lot, because live feedback from someone like you is fantastic.
It also speaks to the nature of the signature move, because what you just did was you asked yourself, who's my audience? And what matters to my audience? And when you're in a commercial art, that is a really important piece of the puzzle. If you're in a fine art, create what you want. Sculpt, paint, express yourself with no parameters, restrictions, do what you want. If it sells, if it doesn't, you don't care, you're an artist. But when you're writing for money, it is a commercial art. And the first thing that you need to do is ask yourself, who's the audience? Now, that doesn't mean that you pander. It doesn't mean you go, oh, who's my audience? And now I'm going to do whatever I think they want, they'll buy. That way lies madness and drinking and making bad decisions after 10 p.m. This is not a way to go. But if we can talk about Venn diagrams, and I know that writers love math, if we can talk about the intersection of sets, the question, who's my audience, is one very important set. Intersecting with that set is another set, which is, who are you? And it's in the intersection of those sets, which is a small subset, that you can possibly find success as a writer, a comic, a commercial artist, anything in that space. So to bring it back to the Comedy Cellar, for instance, any comic walking into a club on Tuesday, thank you, Sara. Sara and I bonded, and so she's helping. Thank you, Sara. Sara, did you take algebra at least, Trig?
Some time ago. I have seen Venn diagrams though, so I was excited to try one for myself.
And it's beautiful.
Thank you.
It's beautiful. Every comic, good, bad, or indifferent, who walks into a club on any show Tuesday night, probably the first thing he should do, if he doesn't do, or she, first thing they should do, is ask the other comics, how's the house? Which is shorthand for who's my audience? What should I be aware of? Is this an audience that is mostly 30s and upscale? Is this college kids? Who showed up tonight? Is it widows and orphans? Who is it? And it's not that you change your material so much as a comic from show to show, but it does color the energy that you bring, the bridge that you build between yourself and the audience, your demeanor, how fast you talk, how slow you talk, what kind of crowd work you do, if it's gentle, if you do crowd work at all. This is a long-winded way of saying whether you're doing stand-up or writing nonfiction or whatever, if you're creating for money, the question of who's in that first set, who's your audience, important question. The second thing, the intersection of who are you? This comes back to what you were implying about your signature move. And if I could ask you, Stu, I'm going to just assume that your signature move is a phrase that you've been using inside this group to denote what makes you special. Okay. And that's really important. One of the things that I say to writers, and I stole this from another writer who was a bit older than me, if you can imagine that. He's dead now. But he used to say to young writers who would ask him, they would say, should I write something that makes people feel happy, that makes people feel scared, that makes people feel angry? And he would say, write something that makes people feel. It doesn't matter what they feel. Just write something that makes people feel. And the only way to do that is if you feel it. You've got to feel it 1,000 times more than the reader is going to end up feeling it. The reader will feel it 1,000th of the passion that you bring to it. So if you don't bring, if it's not something that you genuinely care about, then it's going to turn into what most things turn into, which is a big pile of nothing, a big pile of who cares. And in terms of the signature move, it is so important. I'm glad that you focus on it because, as I say to comics and I say to writers also, point of view. It's all about point of view. For a comic, for instance, getting laughs is, if your goal is to become a star as a comic, not if your goal is to be the middle act at the Chuckle Hut in Cleveland, but if your goal is to, because you may well pass through that step in your evolution, but if your goal is to become a star, getting laughs is, yes, necessary, but insufficient. What you need is a clear point of view, a point of view that makes you different from all the other people that are going to be on that stage that night and all the thousands of stand-up comics. The way, when we were starting Comedy Cellar, we had it easy because simply by virtue of being a stand-up in those days, that made you different. But even with that, it was always something that we would focus on. Now it is monumentally more important because of all of the content, whether it's stand-up comedy or sit-down writing or fiction or nonfiction. There's this tsunami of content that is out there competing for people's eyeballs and competing for people's brain time. And it's almost more important these days to be different than to be good. And it's almost like being good, that's on you. If it's something that you can sleep better at night knowing that you have honed your craft to the best level that you can, great. But we all have seen comics that are successful that stink. We've all read nonfiction and fiction pieces that are, very popular. They sell a lot of books or they get a lot of clicks or whatever the metric is, and they stink, but they're different. So that goes back to the Venn diagram. So if you want to monetize, that's the third set. So the third set, it's these 3 circles, and Sarah's going to create it for us right now. So in fact, you just pin Sarah's box to this Zoom call and just forget about me. I'll be a little one in the corner. But if you got who's the audience, who are you, and what makes you different as a writer, and we'll get to how to find that. And then the third intersection, the third set being monetizing it, if that's your goal. So, Sarah, a little slow with the Venn diagrams there, Sarah. Is it coming?
My circles were getting worse.
Ah, there you go. No, that's great. Now, if you can, yeah, exactly. If you can shade in that little tiny area in the middle, that'll really make it, give it a graphic representation, which research.
Is the title like success?
Oh, now
What's the title?
I'm going to let everybody make their own title to that. Whatever you think this describes, that's what it describes. I hate to get rabbinic on everybody, but and by the way, speaking of being rabbinic on people, I'm going to give you a 60-second MFA in screenwriting. Okay? 60 seconds. You don't need to go to USC for 4 years and spend $500,000. You don't need to buy the 900-page book by the guy who never sold a script in his life and has the chutzpah to go speaking and lecturing and reading just reciting his book for people who are paying $800 for 4 days to listen to this guy drone on and on. I survived it when I was, a young writer, but just shoot me, for God's sakes. Pontificating and blithering, and all these people that have so many opinions about how scene structure and script writing and all this stuff, and they've never sold a damn thing in their lives, and they can't know what they're talking about, because if you're in the television business, for instance, if you're a TV writer, it's all about what happens in the writer's room. And if you have not spent years in the writer's room surviving that, because it's one thing to get in and it's another thing to stay in. Two different skill sets. If you have not survived that, you can't possibly know what you're talking about. You can't. Anyway, so to be rabbinic and to boil the Torah down to one sentence while I'm standing on one foot, I'm going to take all of you back to your bar mitzvahs. Here's the 60-second MFA for screenwriting fiction. Call it a movie, call it television. And then we'll see if it has an application to nonfiction, which I know most everybody here has been involved with. But it boils down to this. Story is just another word for conflict. Who wants what, and what stops them from getting it? If you can describe your story in that one sentence, who wants what and what stops them from getting it? And if you pick your who properly, so that it's a who, your hero, somebody that we care about, not somebody that we are told by the author we should care about, or somebody that we need explained to us why we care about them. No. It's a 6-year-old boy who lost his dog. I care. Whatever that is, whatever makes you care. Who wants what? If you pick the who so that we care, wants, they're actively trying to get something. They're actively trying really hard to get something. They're actively trying to get something that they'd rather die than not have it. Okay, so who wants what? What's at stake? What are they trying to get? And that's got to be something that we just feel like, oh, we want them to have it. We don't, if it's, she's got to win the account. Who cares? Win the account, don't win the account, I don't care. If it's a little boy who's the only person knows that aliens are going to invade the world and nobody believes him, I care a little more. So who wants what being the stakes, and what stops them? That's the conflict. Because if the person gets what they want right away, your show's, as soon as the person gets what they want, show's over. So who wants what stops them? And the second is causality. So because that person is trying really hard person we care about is trying really hard that we can see to get something that we understand, we feel why they want it, and we hope they get it. And they hit this obstacle, and the obstacle thwarts them. That causes them to escalate. It causes them to go to the next major beat of the story. Excuse me for explaining something you may already know, but beat is just a term for the next major event in the story. It also could be a minor beat. So just the next event in the story. So what stops them, thwarts them, that causes the hero to take the next action, which is a bigger action, more at risk, more danger. As this rising action occurs, that's how your story builds in momentum. So depending on how long your project is, for instance, if you're writing a movie, say 120 pages long, because in script format, each page is considered approximately a minute. So a typical movie, 120 minutes long, 120 pages, of course, anywhere from 90 to 120 pages is where a feature film can come in. But for the math, because we already survived the Venn diagram part, so for the math of it, your act one, there'll be 4 acts. You may have heard about the 3-act structure. In my view, the 3-act structure is just another word for the 4-act structure, because very quickly they will explain to you how in the middle of you got your act 2 complication. So why don't you just say 4 acts? So from page 1 to 30 is act 1. At page 30, your hero, who wants what? He's been trying to get it, and he's had little thwarts. At page 15, he's got a sub-major thwart that causes him to move up. Page 30, now he's got a big thwart. Page 30 to 60 is your act 2. Now you're midway in. By the time you're at page 60 and halfway in, your hero should be in the exact opposite place of where they wanted to be in the beginning. And that causes them to move even higher in what they're willing to do and what's at risk. Page 90, there's no way out. There's no possible way for this person to get out of this trouble until they risk everything, and now you're on the home stretch. People also, and I'll shut up in a second. Stu, you got to interrupt me. My wife assures me that if you don't interrupt, you don't get a word in edgewise.
Good. I'll let you get to act 4 at least, and then I'll change course.
Okay. People will also ask me, young writers will say, what about the theme? What about the theme of your script? And that's one of the few buttons I have that gets pushed. And I will say, the theme is none of your business. Don't even think about the theme of what you're writing until you've written at least the first draft. If you've written something that's interesting, I promise you, it has a theme. I promise you. Whether you want to express that theme this way or that way or the other way is up to you. If it's interesting, it has a theme. After you've written the first draft, the theme may emerge to your consciousness more clearly. That's what this is about. But still, that's your business. If knowing that helps you in your next draft when you rewrite it because you want to accentuate this aspect or bring this aspect down, if you want to do those kinds of modulations, that's fine. But first, be interesting. If you're interesting, it's about something and it has a theme. Because this isn't about getting an A in a class. This is about selling. This is about selling something.
Wait, and this is actually great because it was something I was going to ask you about. You mentioned, and you're living this out right now, the no theory allowed approach to doing work. And this comes up all the time in our group. It's what's my signature move? What's my positioning? How am I different than other bloggers, for example? And there's this temptation to get very strategic about it. But at least in my own case, I've noticed when I pick the theme and then try to write the thing, I just lose energy behind it. So I'm curious how you've maybe you yourself or other kind of creative folks, are you advising people to basically pursue wherever that interest takes you? How would you encourage folks to discover that stuff that's worth writing about?
It's an inside job. I don't think it takes long. I think it takes a cup of coffee and being honest with yourself with no judgment, asking yourself, what do I really care about? And if you, and the things that pop up immediately, those are the things you care about. Now, what happens sometimes, not to me, of course, but what happens sometimes is that our brain starts judging with all the stuff that we feel we should be interested in. And that way lies craziness and poverty. You can't get there if you're thinking about what you should be interested in. So first be honest with yourself. What do I actually care about? And there'll probably be more than one thing. What's also interesting, like for instance, my wheelhouse, and I've done pretty much every genre except for procedural cops, procedural medical. I can't do that. I don't know. So the cop, he interrogates the guy, and then the guy says this, and then the cop, I can't help you. But where it's character driven, that's what I do. And I've done that in comedy, I've done it in drama, I've done it for every demographic group. I've done it for tween audiences, for Nickelodeon, and I've done it for mainstream network audiences, and I've gone as edgy as you can possibly get. I wrote and produced and directed the last two projects of Richard Pryor's life. And you could ask, what the hell is a guy like this doing with Richard Pryor? Believe me, one of the few delights of my life is that there's a title page of a script that says written by Richard Pryor and Billy Grundfest. That, I never thought I would ever see that. And we made that project for Showtime. It is as edgy as it gets. And then I also wrote and ran a series for Viacom that was basically a lesbian Friends. And you can ask, what the hell is Billy Grundfest doing, writing and running? And I had a terrific partner, Michelle Paradise, who's gone on to great wonderfulness thing. Michelle is one of the writers on the new Star Trek Discovery. So look at that. So she went from indie film that we adapted into a series, and then she and I wrote all the episodes, because one of my little superpowers is collaborating with people that have a very clear, and here we go again, point of view, a very clear point of view. And then what I do is I inhabit that point of view. So if it's a point of view that I understand and like, that I instinctively respond to, not that I should respond to, but I watch it and I go, oh, I love this person. Then I know that's when I feel that love thing. And when you sit with your cup of coffee and you ask yourself, what is it that I really care about? What that I really want to write about? If you get to the should, you're dead. But that bubbling up of, oh, just that's the signal. There's gold over there. Because people will tell you there's gold at the end of all these different rainbows. You got to find your rainbow. A pot of gold at the end of somebody else's rainbow, that's not your pot of gold. So now we've gone to rabbis and leprechauns. I don't think a lot of people can do that still.
This is a perfect segue and where I meant to start us, but we got here through a much more interesting route, which is you've gotten to see some folks that are household names for us. You got to see them when they weren't. Presumably, stand-up comedy is one of the quickest ways to live experiment with your own voice, your point of view, talk about a rapid feedback cycle, right? That is just, there's no delay. Our equivalent of that might be sending out a newsletter to our readers and having it flop or unsubscribe or whatever the equivalent might be. But I may be curious of how you've seen some comedians really find their point of view and start to double down on it. And maybe these are folks that you've coached directly, but I would be curious to hear a little bit more of some real examples of people you've seen figure out their voice over time.
Sure. I'll give you a couple of different examples. One, Ray Romano. Ray always had the makings of a great comic because he physically looks the part. He looks like, first of all, he's extremely likable on stage and off stage. There's no difference. Guys like Ray Romano, Jon Stewart, Paul Reiser, there's no difference. The likability that you see on stage is not an act. They are just the sweetest people in the world. So with Ray was doing great. He started largely at the Comedy Cellar, which he considers his home club now, and he has been a huge supporter. That's the thing about the Cellar is the Cellar was built, I built that place, and it continues to operate on one idea, which is respect. And I started as a comic, so I knew that comics never got treated with respect. When I opened the Cellar, which was actually my third comedy club, the first two flopped, which is another thing. You'll get a lot of rejection letters as a writer. Don't necessarily take those to heart. That just means that person was not right for you. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. You got to ask a lot of people to dance before somebody says okay, especially if you're me. But the point is this: Ray was really interesting because when you listen to him actively, and I'm going back now to the early 80s, I was watching this guy who was getting laughs, killing, doing great. His point of view inherently was, I'm a blue collar, likable guy. But it needed more. And some of his stuff was about his wife, and some of his stuff was about driving a mattress truck, and some of his stuff, so it was about fax machines, and it was a little of this and a little of that. And he was out here in LA many years ago with his manager, and we were in his hotel room, and they were asking me, how do we break through? We're headlining, he was headlining at comedy clubs in Cleveland and wherever, but he plateaued. And so the question was, what do we do? And I said, what you got to do is get rid of all the material that does not sell this one idea. You are a husband and dad. That's it. You're a stand-up husband. You're a stand-up dad. And it actually wouldn't kill you if you actually said so explicitly in your sets, because people need the framing. They need to know what, they're not going to do the work. They're not going to do the mental work of going, well, what is this guy's point of view? Just tell them. And if you tell that, you can tell them artfully, you can tell them inartfully, but tell them. And so then he started actually to do it. He had kids. At that point, he began to have kids. And he took he was taking home videos of his kids. And I was saying, you got to show these to the audience, because he was doing things with his kids. He had twins, and he's a big guy. So he would use the twins as dumbbells, as weights to do his exercises, and he'd use them as door stops, and he'd use them as props. And I said, this is hilarious. And if you show this as part of your act to the audience, you're telling the audience, you're telling the world, you're telling producers, oh, he's a television show. Oh, stand-up husband, stand-up dad, and he's a television show. He's showing it to us. And I'm not going to take any more credit for it than that. But that's sometimes, if you tell somebody E equals MC squared, it doesn't take very long to say that. It doesn't take long to tell somebody if your script comports with who wants what and what stops them. And then that becomes a causality thing that raises the temperature, and now you're into your next beat. You don't, if your script does nothing but that, it won't stink. Will it be good? I don't know. It depends on how talented you are, but it won't stink. And I've read so many scripts from MFAs, from professional writers that don't do that. And it's a puzzlement. But anyway, back to your question. So Ray, that was one question with Ray. With Jon Stewart, the Jon Stewart story is really interesting. He came in on an audition night, which only started after midnight as far as I was concerned. But he came in, it was like a rainy Tuesday in February, and there was 11 people maybe in the audience. They were all drunk sailors on shore leave from Sweden, didn't speak English or whatever. And he went on and did not get a laugh, couldn't buy a laugh. But I so loved this guy because, first of all, he didn't let the fact that he wasn't getting anything bother him. He didn't become hostile or so. I knew right away, oh, I love this guy. He's getting nothing, and that's perfectly okay with him. The second thing was what he was doing. I had only found one other person that was doing it, namely Bill Maher. The difference with Bill Maher, who I never had to give any notes because Bill was a savant. Bill came in at, 22 years of age, 23 years of age, ready to host The Tonight Show. He wore a blazer. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. He did political and social material. But what was different about Bill, and excuse me for going down this rabbit hole, but everybody's following, I hope. I'll get back to John in a second. With Bill, as opposed to other alleged political comedians who sometimes what they do is they make a political statement, typically to the left of center, and then they tag it with a joke. A joke that is usually not of high comedic value or high degree of difficulty. A joke, okay. That doesn't make you a political comedian, in my view. What Bill was doing, he wasn't doing that. He didn't give, okay, here's my political statement, and now here's a joke about it. His observations about politics and about society, the observations themselves were laugh-provoking. And so when I saw Bill the first time, I went, wow. Very few people can do that. George Carlin did that. Bill Maher did that. John, even though he was so green, he was a bartender down the street at the Mexican restaurant down the street from the Comedy Cellar, and he came in after his shift. John, even though he was green, was trying the same thing. And I felt like I have to support this. I could name other allegedly political comedians that I did not support and who hate me to this day. They hate me. It's so many years later, they can't let it go. Some of whom I have made up with because they have gone on to success later in life. But why drag Mark Maron into this conversation? My point is this, Sue. He and I are fine now. Because he's become enormously successful. And it's amazing the healing power of success. Amazing. So with John, I gave him one note that night. I said, look, please come back. I said to him, I never ask anybody to come back, but please come back. And tomorrow night, just hold the microphone because what he was doing was he was a pure monologist. He was standing straight at the mic, didn't touch the mic, did his material. And in later nights, I would say to him, you are not a vehicle for your material. Your material is the vehicle for you. It takes a long time for a comic to understand that. And every time you think you understand that, and I say that because I experienced it myself, every time you think you understand that, you elevate to, you go to the next level and you realize, oh, I didn't understand it. I understand it now, but I didn't understand it then. And then you go to the next level, you go, oh, now I really, and you keep realizing how much of an idiot you've been up to that point because you keep understanding it better and better. It's like George Burns used to say when they would talk about how wonderful his comic timing was, he would say, timing is really easy. When they start laughing, I stop talking. And when they stop laughing, I start talking. And you think you understand that when you first hear it, but it takes a long time to really understand that. Anyway, back to Jon Stewart. I told him, come back tomorrow and just hold the microphone. And it was so impressive to me because A, he came back the next night. Comedians don't always have the greatest executive functioning in the world. So the fact that he remembered to come back and could find the place again and did come back, already there's a discipline at work here. There's a conscientiousness at work. And he came back and he held the mic. He took the note. Oh, now I was in love with the guy. Are you kidding? He actually did something that I suggested. I'm married 20 years. Never. 20 years. Suggest, I ask, I insist. The insisting is really hilarious. That's hilarious. But what's my point? So he held the mic, and because he held the mic, what was starting to happen, which is what I intended, but you'll notice I didn't give him theory. I told him, just hold the mic. And what happened was, because he was holding the mic, he could physically move. And because he could then physically move around the stage, that evolved from being able to doing it on purpose. And that got his material and his persona into his body. And he went from being a monologist to being a performer. And he could work the room. He could deal with this side of the room. He could play this side of the room against that side of the room. He was there, he was present, he was in the moment physically. And that's a really important part of all of this. So his signature move was, you like that, Stu? Brought it back.
You read my mind. Perfect callback.
I like that. You see, callbacks. We'll get to callbacks if you want. But Jon Stewart's signature move was being funny about politics and society, where the observations were funny, not here's this political statement, boom, joke. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. Because that's Milton Berle, that's Bob Hope, that's 1957. Later, John and Bill, by the way, both had equivalent conversations with me a little bit later in their careers. John had a talk show for Paramount called The Jon Stewart Show. And he was the host of The Jon Stewart Show. And it got canceled. I think it lasted one season. Bill, similarly, was the host of a syndicated talk show, and he got fired and replaced by David Brenner. And I'll say that I had similar conversations with both, in which I said, let me just say what I said to Bill first. I said, the reason they replaced you with David Brenner is because they could. you're doing something that a lot of guys can do. When you pick, quote, your signature move, when you pick what is that thing that makes me, then you'll be able to create a niche that nobody can compete with. And will you be successful in that niche? I don't know, maybe. But I know that you'll have zero competition because nobody else can do what you're doing. From that conversation is where we created Politically Incorrect, which was his next talk show. So similarly with Jon Stewart, when that show got canceled, that show got canceled. He did a movie. He was an actor in a movie. And he's the first one to tell you he wasn't any good. And I would say to him as well, you're playing somebody else's game. There's a million other people that can host a talk show like that can be an actor in a movie like that. Do the thing that you'll corner the market. There won't be any competition. And especially nowadays when you've got a gazillion comics, a gazillion YouTube streaming, everything, you gotta be different. Being different is the most important thing. Be good too, but be different. Now I'll take a breath.
Oh my God, there's a reason we've spilled over to the Q&A section, because this was just a literal gold mine. I've got like a mountain of notes here. I do want other folks to chime in because I want a few folks on the call who maybe want to dig into some of this. Does anyone want to unmute and steer the direction for the final few minutes of the conversation?
That's it? Just a few minutes?
I think we're almost at the hour, right?
I got time if you got time, Stu. I'm not saying, I'm just saying if you want.
Let's see. With Sarah, we have our first volunteer here.
Sorry, I'm just a mic hog at this point, but I appreciate this opportunity. And Bill, this is amazing. My main, everything, I have so many notes too. The main thing that's coming up though is I have found that a lot of this process, like figuring out your signature move, is iterative, where you're just like spewing stuff out and writing and then finding things that you're good at. But you've raised a question in my mind. What role do you think the mentor plays in this kind of evolution? And a lot of us on the call are prose writers or whatever, or we're writing newsletters or blogs or whatever. And I just wondered if you had any suggestions for trying to get to that faster.
Yes. First, I think mentors come in all shapes and sizes. There are kind of unofficial mentors. There are mentors of the moment, where you'll meet somebody in a supermarket who'll say something that'll make you go, oh, yeah, that's right. So they're just in your life for a moment and they have an impact. Other people are more, quote, official. But if I understand your question, if your goal is to find your signature move, one way of doing it, and you're right about the iterative nature of it, but one way of doing it is when you ask yourself that question, what do I really care about? You'll come up with 1 or 2 or 3 or 9 things. If you're very good at writing about one of those topics, that's really good. But if you combine 2 of those topics, you might be the best writer going in that niche. So you got to start with a niche. Jon Stewart and Bill Maher started with a niche. Ray Romano started with a different niche. They didn't try to be everything to everybody. They said, this is what I do. And as opposed to like Dave Attell, who has a very strong niche, and he hasn't changed one bit since he started. He was the world's youngest dirty old man, and now he's just the world's middle-aged dirty old man. And when he gets old, he'll be the world's dirtiest dirty old man. But dirty old man has always been what he does. He's never didn't evolve. But so if you take, and we're back to Venn diagrams now, if you take two topics that you care about, that combination will make you special and different. If you find a way to combine three, you become the thought leader of the universe in that niche. So similarly, if you're writing scripts, most of my stuff has been some version of character comedy, romantic comedy, where the comedy where what is at stake is love. It can be between a guy and a girl, it can be a guy and a dog, it can be parent-child, it can be siblings, but what's at stake for me is never the account or invading the world, because I hope the world gets invaded. I really do. This is enough. We've done enough. I hope the aliens come any time now. Anyway, so back to prose and nonfiction writing. Combine two things, you're a thought leader. Combine three things, you're the expert in the country. And then monetize that niche. Sell a t-shirt that says, hey, this combination of three things, some version of that. You can start looking, and that's another thing, start looking at your niche and communicating with your niche as, and please pardon me for saying this, as the beginning of a funnel, the beginning of a sales funnel, the beginning of a monetization funnel. You gotta solve somebody's problem. To get paid, you gotta solve somebody's problem. We're right back to where we started with the question of audience. Who's your audience? So if you like cosplay and you care about fashion, combine those two things and write about that. And then sell cosplay stuff to the people who read your newsletter. I think nowadays you need to be entrepreneurial. And I know that rubs creative people the wrong way a lot of times, but it is as creative an endeavor as the actual creating. You're still engineering ideas. You're still working in the design of ideas. And you just end up pressing different buttons on your keyboard.
I love that. Thank you so much.
You're
That's super
quite
helpful.
welcome. You're quite welcome, Sarah.
And I did, I have rescheduled my meeting right after this. We do have some extra time, Bill, if you're up to hang for a few extra minutes.
No, now all of a sudden I have to go.
Yeah.
Kidding.
Well,
you
perfect.
See what you did there, Stu. I went that way, and then you went that way, and I went the other way.
I didn't follow your advice.
It's comedy. Somebody has to get hurt. And now in that one time, it was you.
Right. My calendar was the immovable barrier. Noah, I think the floor is yours.
Yeah, first, Bill, you helped with an app a couple years ago called Timeful that I wanted to say thank you for, and I'm very sorry that it's gone now. But I was a fan of that. And,
oh my God.
You and Dan Ariely, and I really appreciate you doing that.
If I can just jump in and tell everybody, Timeful was I'll call it a smart calendar app. Those guys would probably kill me for calling it that, but that's what it was. I don't care what anybody says. And if you don't know Dan Ariely, Google him and read anything that he's written. He's a behavioral economist, and he's the funniest behavioral economist you'll ever find. And he's so insightful. But I will say this because Timeful was a Silicon Valley startup with a successful exit. Google bought it. I'm not used to being the dumbest guy in a room, but I was the dumbest guy in that room. And I used that as my signature move, because my job was basically to communicate to the viewer. They call it user, but I call it the viewer, because if you're communicating on a screen you're in show business. You think you're in the tech business, you think you're in the whatever the business is, you're in show business. And so who your audience is for that app, that was like the first question I would ask. And what is the pain point when that viewer meets our app? What's their problem that our app solves? And I would say to them proudly, I'm the dumbest. I graduated from Penn. I graduated Magna. And I'm telling you, I'm the stupidest human being in this room. If you guys can explain to me what that does, I have a possibility of explaining it to the viewers. So that, in that case, what I did was take the lemons of being, in fact, the stupidest guy and make that my signature move. So they knew, okay, we, the guy in charge of product and the guy in charge of marketing, the guy in charge of the CEO, everybody, we got to figure out how do we explain this to Bill? Because Bill's dumb. How do we explain this to him? So that was like the first level. Anyway, go ahead.
No, that's perfect. Thank you for saying that. It actually went perfectly to my question, which was, I'm sure that you've read a lot of nonfiction. Dan Ariely is one of the best, changed my life, literally changed my college major after a conversation with him.
From what to what?
From many different things, consumer behavior, which was a major that I made up based on his advice and just went to the dean and begged for permission. But none of that has anything to do with this. You've read a lot. What would you change about most business writing? What do you see that's out there that you would wave a magic wand and change?
Wow, that is a hard question about business writing. I would say this about, business writing, and I think a lot of writing that's in some kind of a niche like business. And forgive me if I'm not answering your question properly. It'll be my fault because I won't have understood it, because I don't know if I mentioned this, I'm the stupidest guy in the room. A lot of writers, and as you get to the more academic nature of it, feel as though their job is something other than communicating easily to the reader. So they use words that are polysyllabic when monosyllabic would do just fine. They're trying to show how smart they are. And they don't open with the value proposition. The value proposition is, I as a writer am asking you as a reader for your time. I have a responsibility to tell you explicitly or implicitly what's in it for you. And I need to tell you that on fade in. Fade in, we need to grab the audience in a screenplay, and then we can't let them go until fade out. In business writing, you want to state artfully, inartfully, but clearly, what is in it for the reader to read past this first sentence? One of the things I tell scriptwriters is the pages in your script are numbered for your convenience in their order of importance. Page 1 is the number one most important page, because if people stop reading somewhere along page 1, they're not going to see your brilliance on page 2. And your act 2 complication that you've worked out so wonderfully is going to be a voice in the deserted forest. In business writing, and I think in any prose writing, there are a lot of ways of accomplishing that. If you open with a joke, that implies to the reader, oh, I'm going to read the next sentence because I just got rewarded, because that was a fun experience reading I'm going to enjoy reading what this person is writing. So I think you have to start with the value proposition, what's in it for you, and then live up to it. And use words that are friendly and that don't have the agenda of proving that you're smart. Because if you are smart, I'll tell you something. Bill Cosby, yes, all of that is true. It's all true, and he's where he should be. But back in the day, before we knew all these things, I went to a club in Greenwich Village when I was in college, and it was the summer, and I was a aspiring stand-up, and there was a club in Greenwich Village, and a buddy of mine and I went to do 5-minute sets. And because Billy Crystal was next door at the bitter end, Bill Cosby was at the bitter end. And in between shows, Cosby happened to see us right next door. And he saved my life. He saved my comedy life, because talk about mentors that come into your life for a moment. To my friend, who was Paul Provenza, who later became very good. He was always a terrific comic, still is. To my friend Paul, who was something of a savant and was great right away, Cosby talked, he sat us down for 45 minutes on this place called The Dugout. It's all coming back. 2 little steps, and then this hole-in-the-wall bar kind of thing. And to Paul, he talked shop. When you do that, you might want to pause a little bit before, and if you hit that harder, and have you thought about peeling the onion in a different kind of a way? Shop. And then a very stern visage turned to me. And he said, and you are so concerned with showing everybody how smart you are. He said, let me tell you something. You are so smart, you could go on stage, pull down your pants, and hit yourself in the face with a pie, and people would get how smart you are. So stop it. Stop it. You don't have to. They know you can't get away from it. There's nothing about you that doesn't, they get it. Now, tell funnier jokes. And the fear of God, it was like God himself, because Cosby there was nobody bigger. And that wrath saved my life. It saved my life. And I realized what business I was in. I was in the business of making people laugh, not of changing the world and the culture and showing how smart, and none of that. And I've had the opportunity to pass that wisdom on to other comics, some of whom have listened and some of whom have not. And so, yeah, entertain the people, even if it's a business. If you are amusing while you're making some business case, you already now have done the Venn diagram. You're interested in amusing people and you're interested in business. That intersection of sets puts you in a much smaller niche, and now your competition becomes much smaller. That might be enough for Scott Adams, who then added cartooning that is not at all good, and he's the first person to say so. He's no kind of cartoonist, but to be amusing, intersected with business, intersected with cartooning, and he's become Dilbert. That's the model.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Amazing. Who's next? You can unmute. And I know I at least have one follow-up, but anyone else who's curious to ask a question, please unmute and go ahead.
I have a question.
Hello.
Hey, Bill. I'm looking forward to you and Sara collaborating on a Venn diagram email newsletter. Really excited for the Venn diagram of that Venn diagram newsletter. I used to work as a doorman at the DC Improv a long time ago, and I now am realizing how unfunny my writing is. And
Hey.
yeah, I'm realizing I'm missing an opportunity. So when you reread your work, is there a process you go through? You read it out loud? Do you read it to other people? Like, how do you edit yourself before you would send a draft off to someone else?
Oh, that's a really good question. Let's start with what I actually do. When I write a draft of a comedy, I tend to write very quickly, and then I rewrite quickly, because for me, and this is true of a lot of people, but not everybody, for me, my first instinct is usually the best instinct. So I always write from an outline. First of all, let me do a backswing on this. When I come, first let me answer your question, and then I'll do the backswing. I read it to myself, and because I have thousands and thousands of hours in front of live audiences, and when I say in front of live audiences, not just me performing, but me watching people perform, whether it's stand-up or theater or improv or whatever it is. And I've always had a really good ear. I've been doing this since I'm 5. I have no perception that what I do today is any different than what I was doing at 5 years old. And when I was going to camp, you guys might be from New York. What New York Jewish parents do is they ship their children off for 2 months every summer. And then they have the nerve to tell you that this is some kind of sacrifice that they are making on behalf of you, as opposed to they get 2 months without you. My point is this, that in camp, from when I started going, when I was 7, I was hanging out with the counselors who were writing the sketches for every week. We would do some kind of show, be birthday ball, color war, boy, girls sing, cats and dogs, whatever it was. I was this 7-year-old kid who was in on the writing sessions. So I've been doing this my whole, and my parents, I know this isn't what you asked me, suffer. My parents came to America in 1951 after the war. So my mission in life from a very early age was simply mood elevation. I looked at these somber people, them and my brother. These were somber people. And I said to myself at a very young age, if somebody doesn't tell a freaking joke right now, we're going to all be like this forever. So my psychological mission and what I care about inherently, whether I should or not care about, is comedy. I care about humor, comedy, mood elevation. The first audience that I had was my mother. Then that generalized to my father. I would say it generalized to my brother, but I didn't really care. But then it would generalize to my classmates who I saw. These are not happy people. We're all stuck in this place and this is not any fun. And I learned that the teacher was it was a pitching machine. A teacher was just a source of straight lines all day long. And if I picked a number, every teacher had a different number. Oh, I get 3 shots with this teacher. I get to make 3 witticisms off of what they just said. And as long as I wasn't disruptive, but was additive, I could stay in class and not get thrown out. But that started it. And then it professionalized through high school, through college, Comedy Cellar, writing, television. And my perception is I'm not doing anything different than I was. And this kind of goes back to your signature move. Maybe ask yourself, when you're asking yourself with that cup of coffee, what is it that I loved when I was 9? What do I miss about me when I was 9? What's that? Maybe I should do that. Maybe that's what my thing is. I'm gonna weep now. But my point is, to answer your question, I start with an outline. We can get into how I build outlines, but that wasn't your question. If I know what's happening in each scene, I can write very quickly. And then I give myself an afternoon off. I don't think about it. I go back and I rewrite it again, but I hear it in my head. And I'm not 100% right all the time, but I'm right a lot. And I hear it in my head, and I can hear that syllable needs to come out. that word needs to come out. There's a better way of saying that line isn't working at all. And I don't generally write, quote, jokes in a script. It's laugh propagation that comes from character. I do write jokes, but even then it comes from character. I've written numerous Academy Award telecasts and numerous Emmy Award telecasts and Grammys. And so the presenters, believe it or not, there's people writing that crap. And so there have been many times that I've been one of those people writing that crap. But what I always do is I ask myself, who's the audience in the house, in that big room? Because you got to get a laugh from them in order to make the viewer think that you just said something funny. You're not playing to the viewer, you're playing to the house. And the house is a very tough house. But when I've written for Chris Rock, and I've written for Ellen DeGeneres, and I've written for Arnold Schwarzenegger, and these are jokes, yes, but for me, they always come out of an awareness of where in the show is this happening, and who is this person? Writing for Arnold Schwarzenegger, you better own the fact that it's Arnold Schwarzenegger and play off of that and play with that. When I had to do Arnold Schwarzenegger, nobody in the room wanted the assignment. The producer said, okay, who wants to write the Schwarzenegger stuff? And everybody, because he was not known as a particularly funny guy. And I looked around, and it was like the classic scene where everybody's lined up. Okay, I'll take volunteers. And everybody except one guy steps back. And it was like that. But I got him a ton of laughs. And he came over afterwards. Who wrote this? Who wrote this? And they said, Billy. And he thanked me for writing the stuff, because it really owned who he was and his history. Anyway, so I write quickly, and then I read.
Can you talk about your drafts then, actually, since you answered that partially? What's your drafting look like?
My drafting? You mean like when
You said you have a process for writing the drafts?
I have a process for outlining.
Or outline, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, the process is I start with what I said in the beginning, who wants what and what stops them. If I'm writing, let's say in a series, if I'm writing Mad About You and Paul Reiser is my who, and what does he want? I got to take away something. I got to take something away from him, because only in pain is there funny. So I got to take something away from him. What does he want? What does he love? He loves his wife. Okay. He loves his dog. He loves his dog. Okay. He loses his dog. I start thinking, okay, boy loses dog. Paul loses his dog. That's more sad than funny. Somebody else loses his dog. Who would it really annoy him to have lose his dog that he loves? Jamie, yeah, his wife, feels a little too serious and not quite irritating. That goes to mad and not angry and not annoyed. Annoyed is funny. Mad is not funny. Annoyed, irritated, that's funny. His sister-in-law. His sister-in-law loses his dog. The person who annoys him most in life loses his dog. And that came like a classic episode. So that's how I get into the design thinking of Paul wants to find the dog that his annoying sister-in-law lost. And then you get into the question of what the hell was she doing with the dog? Why would his sister-in-law have a dog? What does she love? She likes men. She wants men. She's taking the dog out for walks to meet guys. So she's like this, she's using the dog as her pimp. So now we start with who wants what, and now we go backwards. How did she even get access to the dog? Goes back to Jamie, her sister, Paul's wife. So her involvement. And then, so you go backwards like that, and then you go forwards. So she lost the dog. Now what do we do? Now what does that cause? And just to finish the story for you, what happened was they go out and Jamie and her sister, now the two idiots, go out to look for the dog. They bring back the dog. They find the dog, but it's not the dog. It looks exactly like our dog, but it's a much better dog. Our dog is an idiot. Our dog, if you say sit, will stare at you. This dog speaks French. This dog can dance. This dog is the greatest dog in the world. And in part, the reason that it actually came out, part of the genesis of the idea was I wanted to do an evil twin story, like in the soap operas. But how do you do an evil twin story and still have it be realistic? Not a soap opera, but a realistic sitcom. This is how you do it. The evil twin is the dog. They go out and they find, it's not an evil twin. Our dog is the evil one. We found a better one. So you can see the geometry of this thing. You start with one thing and then you ask what caused that. Causation is your superpower. And what caused that? And you take it back as far as you can. And then you go back from here and then you take it forward as far as you can. And then the geometry of it. We need an opponent. Who should that be? We definitely need an opponent. Who should it be? Should it be the wife? Too harsh. The sister-in-law. Yes. Annoying. Yes. Annoying is funny. And then going forward, so they find this dog. It looks exactly like our dog, but it's a much better dog. And they try to sell it to Paul. Paul doesn't know that it's not the dog. He's thrilled. We found the dog. Oh, yay, yay, yay. And then he notices, so he's dancing now with Jamie, dance of joy. He's dancing and he looks over and he sees the dog is dancing too. And this is the dead giveaway. Something's wrong with this dog because our dog doesn't do anything like this. They get into a conversation, they get into a conflict because, as I said earlier, story and conflict are synonymous. He and his wife get into a conflict because she's broaching the topic, maybe we should just keep this dog. And it gets into theme. I know but the theme didn't happen until after I'd written the first draft. And I got nailed in the Act 2 complication. I got stuck and I called the boss. Great guy, Danny Jacobson, created the show with Paul. And I was a baby writer. I called Danny, it was a weekend. I was on script, meaning I was not to come into the office. I was just to, come back with a finished draft. But I called him on a Saturday and I said, Dan, I'm stuck on this. He goes, yeah, what's the problem? And I told him what the problem was. And he said, yeah, look, what you got to do is you got to find a way to make the way Paul feels about that dog equivalent to the way Paul feels about his wife. I said, oh, is that all? He goes, yeah, that's all. I said, well, how do I do that? And he said, you're the genius I'm paying all this fucking money to. You figure it out. So, and he hung up. I was like, what do I do? And it was a hard one, but I figured it out. And the answer in that situation was, this became a show about unconditional love. One of my pet peeves when I was single was meeting women who had a checklist of the guy that they're looking for. He's got to be this and this. There's a whole series of boxes that he's got to be. Entirely conditional. And so Paul, when his wife is saying, maybe we should keep this one because there's a better dog, Paul is saying, yeah, but he's not Murray. He's not our dog Murray. And it gets to that there is the concept of Murrayness, that there is an inherent quality living things have that we either love or we don't love. And you can't check off the boxes. Yeah, our dog is deficient in every possible way, but I love him. I don't love this one. And it gets him into trouble because he says to his wife, I can't believe I'm repeating this whole episode, but he says to his wife, what if I found somebody who was just like you, but better? Oh. And she goes, well, better how? And now he's in trouble. Well, no, not better. I mean, like taller, whatever. And she's going, oh, taller. And what does this Amazon look like? No, not an Amazon. She had a little growth spurt, and it's okay. But and so now he digs himself a hole, but he's creating this equivalency of Murrayness, and that's how he pulls it out. That's how he gets out of it, because he says to her, because it's not about how tall or pretty or anything, you have a Murrayness. And she busts him. She goes, you pulled that out by the skin of your teeth. He goes, yeah, I did, didn't I? And then not only, then they find the dog's real owners, and the dog, this is the capper to it, the dog's real owners come to pick up their dog, and they look shockingly like Paul and Jamie, but a much better version. They're a much better version. He is he's a neurophysicist, and she's a judge someplace, and they speak 9 languages, and they're dressed very similar to Paul and Jamie are dressed in that moment, but much better. And we realize we blame our children, but it's us. It's us. It's our fault. We blame our children, but they're a reflection of who we are. And so Paul and Jamie have to realize, oh, the dog's deficient because we're deficient. And they decide at the very end, the very last beat is, I hate those people. So the very last beat is, these two are married to each other because they're the only people who will have each other. They're so deficient. And they see everybody out here. They saw a much improved version of themselves, and they can't stand those people. That's a really long answer to your question. I'm sorry, Cole.
And that's how Bill becomes the law. Thank you so much for diagramming that. I yield the floor. Thank you.
I hope that was helpful.
This whole call, as people have been signing off here, we lost people because of time. The last quote was, this was worth its weight in audio gold. This whole conversation has been unbelievably helpful. And it's amazing how much of this maps onto the genre of writing that a lot of folks on this call do. Bill, I just want to thank you for your generosity of time and of wisdom. This was just unbelievable.
My pleasure. It was a great pleasure, Stu. If I can be of any further service, don't call me. Because this is an hour and a half I'll never get back. And you see, who got hurt? You got hurt, because in every just somebody's got to get hurt. But if you just hit them with a Nerf bat instead of a real bat, then it's funny.
I was about to ask you, where should people find you, follow you, keep in touch with you? What's the best place to find you online?
Don't follow me, for God's sakes. I'm paranoid enough. I don't need people following me. If anybody wants to, I'll give you my email. If anybody wants to contact me, feel free. It's billg@hollywoodcorporate.com. Happy to hear from anybody. I know you'll flood my inbox now, but yeah, that's fine. That's an email that it's not a burner email, but it's an email I save for such things. So feel free to reach out for whatever reason. And it was a delight to be with you.
It truly was a privilege. And we're going to put together some kind of show notes, edit down the recording, and get this thing out to the rest of the group, because I just think that the ideas covered here, every writer should chew on and consider. So Bill, thanks again. I literally have, I think, 4 pages of notes here. So Bill, thank you again for the generosity, and thanks everybody for joining and for the questions. And of course, Brett Friedman for connecting us to and being the man behind the scenes, making this happen.
Thanks, Brett.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming, Bill.
Thank
Take
you.
care,
Cool.
guys.
See everybody. Awesome. Thanks. Bye.